Miranda July is a director, filmmaker, artist, and author. Her works include the award-winning collection of short stories, No One Belongs Here More Than You, and the New York Times bestselling novel, The First Bad Man, as well as the films Me and You and Everyone We Know, and Kajillionaire. Woo! Her writing has been featured in the Paris Review, Harper's, and The New Yorker. Laurie Frankel is the New York Times bestselling, award-winning author of 5 novels, including her new novel, Family, Family, as well as 1, 2, 3, and This Is How It Always Is. Her writing has also appeared in the New York Times, The Guardian, The Washington Post, Poets and Writers, Publishers Weekly, and other publications. She is the recipient of the Washington State Book Award and the Endeavor Award. And now you can please join me in welcoming Miranda July and Laurie Frankel.
Hi, well, I can't actually see anybody because of the lights, but I can tell that you're there, and I'm really thrilled. I feel like when the weather is like this late in the spring, the impulse to stay home is real. So thank you all for being here. I'm so thrilled you are. I'm so glad you are. I feel like you're either here because you have already read this book or because you're about to, and I don't know which of you is in a more enviable position because it's such an amazing book, and it's such an immersive book that I feel a little bit like I've been living in Miranda's brain for the last few days. I have so many questions and so much to talk about because it's such a big, deep book, but I know that you all have questions too. I have new technology to access them. So do be thinking now and as we go about the things that you want to ask. We're very excited that you're here. Welcome. We are very excited that you're here.
Yeah, so psyched to be here. This chair is great. I say that. No, I'm truly. It's like I flew today, so it just seems like such a contrast to the airplane chair.
Yes.
What I'm telling you is like it doesn't take much tonight. We've already won. Like we're doing perfectly already. Yeah.
We're great. I mean, this is what they say about Seattle. We have much more comfortable chairs than airplanes. And this is really good. Yes, I know, right? I know. This is like hometown pride here. Thank you for being here. We're so glad you're here. This book is amazing, and this book is really strange in the best way, and it's unusual. I mean, it's almost unique, and reviewers have been wildly impressed, but also kind of nonplussed and flummoxed. And on the one hand, I get it because it's such a remarkable book. And on the other hand, I kind of feel like, middle-aged women, they have sex and families and souls, and they read books and they buy books. So I wonder if, just by way of introduction, you have thoughts as to why everyone is so kind of gobsmacked and taken aback by this thing that you have created.
Okay, I should say I haven't read any of those reviews.
No, of course not. No, you should. I mean,
so I was like with you, and then I was like, wait, they're what? What does nonplussed mean again? Is that the one that's like bad?
I mean, they're all fantastic,
minus?
But no, don't read reviews.
Are they minus about the book? I mean, I guess picture me writing the book. I'm feeling very alone, and I've suddenly entered this time where there's not a lot of imagery or sort of storytelling. There's not what I'm used to, even as far as like information about my own body. I'm having to search on the internet, and it's like not there's no cool graphics or anything. It's just like a list of bad things. And which is weird because so recently there was like such involvement in my reproductive system. Like everyone, wanted in on that. And so it's like there's a cliff on the cover. It's like this sense of stopping. But meanwhile, I'm not alone because I'm having all these conversations with all my friends who are my age, and they're really heated and alive, and everyone's questioning everything and about our bodies and our desires and our marriages and sort of all the structures that we are within. So those two things, it was hard to make sense of the absence and then but this is really remarkable. I mean, some of the people doing the most questioning were the woman who'd had 3 babies and thought that was a great idea a few years ago, it was coming from places I wasn't expecting, almost like it was a radicalizing time, So I put it all in the book, and I did have the sense that if there isn't a book it almost seemed like the reason no one's talking about this time is because it's so humiliating, I guess, that it's out of respect to us. So in parallel to that, what seemed like reality, the vibe of reality, I thought, well, if you do write all this down, then what do you die? Are you killed? What's the thing? What's the reason why not? It's something substantial. And so there was a nervousness, but I knew I wasn't alone. And so it was a theory. I'd hatched a theory that I wasn't alone based on a lot of scientific evidence of talking to other women. And and so this last week has been kind of the test, you know what I mean?
And here we all are.
It has been really, so interesting. I just actually wrote my editor, and I was like, I'm having so many more ideas because the conversation isn't in my head. This is how things actually change in a more accelerated way, is when it's an out loud conversation. And so I'm having new ideas that I wish were in the book, and I could already feel her being like, I hope you're not going where you... No, they don't need to be in the book, but I am excited to be here and to talk.
And to talk about this, it really is remarkable because I think we talk about middle age in men in this very laudatory way. And when we talk about, and I think you're right, we mostly do not talk about middle age with women, but when we do, it's this very shameful thing. And so, some of it is that you've stood up and said, yes, we're going to have this conversation, and I'm not embarrassed about it. And even before we get to the characters and the language and the story, which is really remarkable, already my mind is blown by the back of the book. Just that you have written this book about this thing. You want to start by reading to us?
Okay.
Yeah. We picked out a good passage for you all. I was saying backstage that I don't read at these things because I'm a terrible actor, but the woman is a wildly talented actor. Just hear her read.
Okay, so this is pretty far along in the book, but I think, why not? Okay. No shame, just I'll wait. Okay. Okay. All right. Was this the secret? So she's walking down the street. Okay. Yeah, she's just done something surprising, and she's walking down the street in the middle of the night. It was 2 a.m. I'd left the known world and I hadn't died. In fact, I felt fantastic. Was this the secret to everything? This bodily freedom, it felt intuitive and healthy, as if promiscuity was my birthright as a woman. Maybe it was. Was this the skeleton in civilization's closet? The reason why men had come down so hard on us since the start of time? I had the urge to call my mom and tell her the good news, but no, it was too late in every way. The moon, so huge. It suddenly seemed natural and sweet to fuck all my friends, but also my lawyer, who I couldn't remember the face of because we only communicated through email, and everyone else I worked with, regardless of if they were someone's assistant or the head of a company. What better way to understand other people's realities? I should have sex with both my parents, of course. It was only a matter of time. And obviously my cousins, wherever they were, should all be fucked. I lamented the relatives who had already died before we could share this tenderness. Children weren't a part of this, but the parents of Sam's friends should be brought in, especially the mothers I had nothing in common with. Fisting would cut right through the politesse. And who else? Like God making a new civilization, I tried not to leave anyone out. 45 minutes later, I was still walking. I no longer wanted to fuck everyone in the world. That was lunacy. Now I wanted to eat the world like a giant fruit. I wanted to go to other countries, yes, but also how come when I dropped Sam off at school, I always hurried home, even when there was no urgency? What was keeping me from taking a different exit? Why didn't I throw themed parties or run an artist salon? I should have a lover, sure, but also other specialized relationships. Someone who I only cried with. Someone for mutual back scratching, artistic pilgrimages. I could be the part-time child or pet of a lonely adult. How interesting for both of us. And each of these people could be anyone from any walk of life. I had always done this kind of thing, but in secrecy, Davy, or in my work, harmless make-believe, or while belittling myself, what a kook, when really this was no trifling matter. A person with a journeying, experimental soul should be living a life that allowed for that. The past wasn't my fault. Of course, I'd been using prefab structures, not knowing any better. But now I was older and I could see my new path. I could see my new path clearly, extending from tonight and ending when I died. I get it. I whispered into the darkness. And thank you, I added, because we hadn't talked in a while. Mm-hmm.
It's amazing, right? It makes you want to read the rest of the book. I have been describing this book to people as a slow dawning love story. And it seems to me that it is a book in some ways about like remarriage, not like marrying again, but like revision. You talk about that the vestiges of marriage are the same, even though all of the supports for them have changed. And I wonder how you went into this book talking about something as traditional and familiar as marriage, and then revisioned it.
Yeah, I mean, there's sort of like degrees of personalness to answer that question, of course. I mean, here's a funny thing. So at the start, when I first sold the idea of the book, I suddenly got really nervous that I actually wouldn't have time to write a whole novel because I hadn't done that since having a child. I'd had a child kind of halfway through the last novel, so I figured, well, I had half of the book to have those mornings where you wake up and you pull the computer into bed and you just go until you're hungry and you don't get dressed, you eat and go back in. And, like that kind of just single-minded focus. I was like, how do you do it if you don't have any days like that? Because that's, one of the things with a kid. And so I said to my husband, that word is no longer the word in use, but still my wonderful co-parent. I said, what if I spent every Wednesday night in my studio so that I could just have one night a week where I woke up and pulled the computer into bed? And then I'll, do pickup on Thursday. And it wasn't a big deal. Like, it seemed like a practical, we also make movies and schedules get weird, and this was like sort of going to be the schedule for the book. But of course, it is a big deal. As I lived that for years and had conversations with other mom wives, they'd be like, wait, what? You have just one night off a week? Like permanent? Like you can do any... and it was a little bit like pulling in a kind of practical way, although obviously, there was something about me, it felt, I guess, safe to do it through my work, but something about me that was beginning to be like, wait, what is this structure? Like, how is it specific to me? Because I'm not sure it is, and how odd for me, who's been so careful in my work to make every, to make it just how I wanted it to be, and felt fine doing that. But not so. I mean, I have to admit, I didn't do that with marriage and family. I frankly felt lucky to have both. I felt like my mom hadn't, and that I was real progress. And it's not that that's not true, but I hadn't yet gotten to the point of sort of past gratitude into specificity. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Past gratitude and into specificity is I feel like is such the hard thing to do, especially when your brain is occupied with these things that are so different, which is like creativity and parenting, like working and parenting. It's not that they're not both work, but they're really, really different kinds of work. In a book where I underlined, I think more than half of it, the image that stood out to me was Buzz Aldrin returning from the moon and emptying the dishwasher. And I thought, yes, that's exactly what it is. In fact, you have a lot in common with the unnamed narrator of this book. Something which is highlighted by the fact that you've left her unnamed. If I were thinking of her as, if she had a name and I were constantly thinking of it, I probably wouldn't necessarily think it was you. But because you have left her unnamed and because she shares so much with you, it feels very autofictional. Clearly a choice that you made. Why?
Right.
Given that it was going to necessitate everyone asking you on book tour this very question.
I know. That's been interesting. I mean, well, I love autofiction and memoir, and I love it because you are like, yeah, we're not just making shit up here. Like, life is real. This really happened, and that's why it's so urgent feeling. So, of course, I envy that, and, read something, Annie Arnaud, whatever, Sheila Heti, all these people do not want to be called autofiction, by the way. But they're not here.
We won't.
And I try and write it, and it's bad. That's not my skill. The truth comes out in fiction. That's how it works for me. But this book, it's really about the body. And so it was like, what am I going to do? Make up a fictional body? And then, how will I know what's happening exactly with that fictional body? And it's really specific. I mean, more so than another book where you actually, that is what you do. You do make up a fictional body. And this one, I knew I was going to have even graphs. There ended up being just one, but there was, anyways. So I thought, well, just loan this narrator your body and don't name her. Kind of make a space for a U-shaped space, and then do what you always do. She can do whatever you want, and and I did in the back of my head think like, this is gonna, like they already love to conflate women with the narrator and then me extra because I've acted in my movies and like, this is really asking for it. But I was kind of like, isn't that a funner position though? Instead of like spending all your energy going like, no, it's not me. Like just fighting this like losing battle, you know? Just be like, okay, here's where we are in history, so let's have some fun with it. Like, let's use that energy, that kind of salacious, I mean, I do it too. I'm always flipping to the author photo and just because I need to, that's what she looks like, you know, yeah, so like, let's use it as a tool since it's going to be there anyways. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and similarly, though I think it's probably, well, I don't know, you'll have to tell us, but I feel like it's a similar choice with the really different repercussions. You declined to gender the kid. Is another thing that we just don't know, that you get around through the clever use of names and pronouns in a very similar way to the narrator. How hard is it not to gender the kid? And is that like a similar choice or a different choice?
Right, that's different. You know, everyone's fictional in the book, but I didn't mess around in that way with the other characters because I actually, you know, don't want everyone else to get asked, you know, especially my kid. So my kid's non-binary and, you know, uses they, them pronouns. But I was like, well, that's a little pointed to also have the kid in the book like that. So I did he for a while, then I did she. They were feeling weird. And then finally I went to my child Hopper and I just sort of said, well, here's what I'm doing. You know it's a fictional character, but what do you think? And they said, well, I think everyone in the book should be they, them.
Nice.
And I was like, you're right. I'm not going to do that because I'm like here in history, and this is a big deal here to have this they them child. I mean, not really, but yeah, it was really. I mean, they are always kind of just, you know, just like ahead on that, and so it wasn't. After that, I didn't think about it anymore, and it's easy because it's like my life, so it wasn't some hardship or anything. Yeah.
Yes. And in fact, come to that, you asked for input from, well, your narrator asked for input from a lot of people in her life. In fact, you compare it to open source, which is a really interesting idea for marriage. Less so for software, which I cannot understand for my life, but for marriage, that's a really interesting idea. Tell us what you mean by open sourcing marriage, but also that process of asking all of these people for input on a world you were making up.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I guess my feeling was kind of like marriage more than like early relationships where you're always sort of chit-chatting with your friends about like every step of the, you know, beginning of something. Then it sort of gets siloed off and it's like, we're now us. And it's sort of a betrayal of us if I get too detailed, which maybe that is a form of respect, but it also means it doesn't evolve as quickly as, you know, that's the whole thing with open sourcing software. Now I'm going to go to the very limits of my knowledge here. Did zero research for the book. Which is like the whole idea is everyone's working on something at once so it can evolve really quickly, you know, iterate really quickly. And I feel like marriage is kind of the opposite, right? It's like, it's so far back in like 1862 or something, you know, it's like, because nobody's sharing any information. And so, yeah, she needs to resolve something rather quickly, and it's hard to have any perspective on what she should do. so she starts kind of pulling her friends. And I mean, that wasn't, I mean, you know what life is like. That's fictionalized, but I do always talk pretty openly with my friends, and I did kind of force the issue more while I was doing this book, and would get, I'd be like, so what exactly are you thinking about when you masturbate? Like, just lay it out in as much detail as possible, please. Like I just, and it's so, yeah, I mean, some of that made a room in the book. And I think the most important thing about the book was, as far as having other people's voices, was with a topic like this, like, yes, I have to be specific because it's a fiction and that's how fiction thrives, but it's so different for everyone if we're talking about perimenopause and the body. And I mean, think about how, like, you and your friends' periods, menstruation I'm talking about, are so different that it's almost like if you say something about your version of having a period, it's like mean to them, because it's so different for them, or like it's almost like a war between your two different kinds of period, like which is the more real one or something. And that's a similar kind of thing. So I didn't want to set up, it would be very easy to set up a situation, a book, where you would have this kind of almost anger because it wasn't your experience. And so I had to keep finding ways for it to feel like, yes, this one woman's like this, but she's surrounded by people she loves who don't agree with her and aren't having the same experience. And she, in a way, goes further and further, while maintaining all her relationships onto her own specific path. Yeah.
Yeah, it is, in some ways, I feel like the central tension of the book between, like, what is the way it is for so many people, and what is the way it is just for you, and the fact that until you start talking to people, you don't know which is which. And that's something she finds out, I think she finds out along the way. I think this is going to sound like a non sequitur, but I swear it isn't. I swear I'm going to loop it all back together at the end, which is talk a little bit about medium. And like, because you work in lots of them. You make films, you make visual art, you are very widely talented, like across a lot of different ways of storytelling. This story was a novel, like clearly from the idea of it. Why did this story have to come in novel form?
I wish I had a better answer to this question.
There's
honestly,
never good
it's
answers
like,
to these.
If I don't, because books and movies take so long that if I don't essentially alternate between them, I worry I will kind of forget how to do the other one. Like if I was to make another movie right after making my last movie, Kajillionaire, then it would be so long. So while I was making Kajillionaire, I also had a little file folder on my desktop called Novel 2. Just such a hopeful name, as if there's just going to be Novel 12, Novel 13, and I would kind of put things in it that, clearly weren't part of Kajillionaire, but were still interesting to me and kind of seemed like, oh, this is a whole world of thought that I'm very confused about. The whole world of, think about on Kajillionaire, if anyone saw it. Did anyone see it? It was like a pandemic. It's like I was fishing. It's just because it came out in the pandemic, so it's sort of a muted experience for me. I didn't ever watch it with an audience. There's some women in it who are younger than me, and Deborah Winger, who's older than me, and being in the middle, there was something about the experience of that and the conversations I had that I think was somewhat, was part of the beginning anyways, and was making me, yeah. So they are all connected, I'm just one person living, but yeah, I knew I wanted to write a novel, and it seemed, writing is sort of the best. Not wrong. Books win.
Books win, yes. Books win. Can you say that again? So I feel like that's the thesis statement here.
As far as like control and really saying exactly what you mean and having this internal world, it was perfect for this topic. Yeah.
I have this note in my own notes that says, ask her which medium is the best, parentheses, why is it the novel?
Really, you do? Wow, okay.
Because it is the best. Though I do, some of it I feel like is I only write novels. It is impossible for me to imagine working with other people creatively. Seems like an extraordinary thing to do. It is like you have asked someone else to breathe for you. And yet you do this you're going back and forth between them. And because that's so much of what this book is about, how to live by yourself and then how to work with other people despite the fact that they are other people and therefore kind of annoying, means I have all of these questions about how you literally sit down and do this work.
This book, or just every,
or really, or
yeah.
all of it. It's a big question.
Well, as fun as it all is, like pleasurable, it really comes out of almost unendurable pain and confusion. Like that is the thing ultimately that makes me go to make something, It's just kind of like I'm down on my knees, like I'm so devastated or sad or scared, sort of terrified, and that's the solace. It's at times I worry sort of that it's like making all my feelings go right past me into a project, kind of like keep like that away, like keep moving, which also like maybe it's okay, as problems go. So that is my instinct, and it's kind of whatever medium you put down before me. When I'm in pain, I will use it, and in my day-to-day life, there's a fair amount of that doesn't, no one sees, it's almost like a security blanket or like a kind of self-soothing, like making things, a lot of not great stuff, too, I should say, but, served its purpose. Yeah.
Although you also talk a lot, or again, the narrator you talk a lot, via the narrator, let's say, about the conditions required to make art. In part because at the beginning she's lacking them, and so were you. And specifically the conditions required by middle-aged women to make art. And since we in this room we are pro-making art, what have you landed on? What are the ways to better those conditions?
Wait, sorry, I'm so tired. When earlier you said she's Latin, what was she? And also the narrator?
Oh my gosh, I have no idea. Oh, lacking, yes.
Oh, lacking.
I'm sorry.
Okay,
I get so excited and then I'm talking
you
too
talk
quickly.
Fine.
I know.
I'm like, have like this tired filter.
Book tour is exhausting.
No, I'm not. This is what I'm doing. This is the part where I get energy. It's, just the travel. Yeah.
Which is in fact some of the answer to the question.
Okay, and sorry, so the question, she's lacking, and that's all I remember.
Okay, let me rephrase. I'm just wondering, what do we have to do? What are the conditions under which we can encourage art and like support and facilitate the making of art.
Right, as like a culture?
As like a culture. And some of your answer was, I need my own house.
Right, right. Yeah. How can we do that as a culture? I feel like I'm, like it's a test. I do know some ways. I mean, are you, I guess I can think of it, it's funny, so, right, I have this child, so I can sort of extrapolate out from that. Like, it's insane how easy it is to try and get a person to do what you want or be the way you want through shaming them. And it's weird, it's not like the shaming that you're picturing that's like 1950s, like, no, you can't wear a dress, or, like, no, I'm on top of that. No, it's just like, it's just almost like an absence or a little, just this sort of quiet but consistent judgment on things that are really their path. And I don't totally understand. And in feeling that in me, and being like really horrified, like, how do I undo what I've already done? You can kind of get a panic, like, is it too late? Have I already messed this person up? It's pretty subtle, just so you don't go home thinking, but that's the worst of it, right? It's so subtle. And then it's real easy to imagine from there, like, oh, God, like if I can see this like living being already getting kind of a little tilted, a little like trying to please me because of this, because of knowing my preference in a sort of shaming way, like what hope is there? And so I guess there isn't, like, it is something that kind of ultimately has to start coming from within, and you hope you have the tools to do that, but you can also, like, make them. It's not something that has to have, like, the perfect soil, it's a thing I think you make in conversation with new people, in conversation with art, like you have that capacity, like I think we're built for that, for this kind of ability to have a sort of revelation and like love yourself through that. And yeah, anyway, there's a answer about it. Yeah.
I mean, I think it was the perfect, in fact, I think it was such the perfect answer that though I have 420 more questions, and I was going to squeeze one more in. In fact, I think we should turn it over and let the audience ask some questions, because I feel like that note of we do it through conversation is the one to end on. I feel like we do it through conversation is in many ways the thesis of a really, really complicated book. So I think that was amazing, actually. So, and we're at time. It's, time to let you all ask questions. But like, here's the thing: 405 questions I have left here. So if you don't have a lot of things to ask, know that I'm going to jump right in.
You could just pretend it was. You'd be like,
"That's right. Oh yes. Oh here. That's true. That's true. I am in charge of Q&A. We're going to ask whatever I want." Some of you have, I think, sent some questions via. Oh my gosh, you absolutely have. Which is great, and then also you're going to line up and ask questions. Oh, at the microphone, and that's going to be great. Okay, so while we get people lined up, let me start at the top here, which is this: what has been the hardest scene in any of your films for you yourself to get through, either in practice and or emotionally?
Oh yeah, there's a little moment in the future, my second movie, and okay, thank you. I was supposed to cry, and I was just having like a hard time on that movie in general, and wasn't really clicking with the DP, and it's just like me and this camera, and now I have to cry, and I'm not like a pro actress who's like has a million ways they do that. And mostly I was just like really just felt like a frozen block of ice. And I remember like I just didn't want anyone to know I was having this problem because I guess I'm the director, you know? And so I was like, I need to take a call now, you know, we're just gonna hold the unrelated, you know, I need to, and then I called my assistant, wonderful young man who I still work with, he's an editor now, and I was like, I have to cry, make me cry. And he was like, okay, how do you want me to do that? And I said, say I'm a good director. And yeah, so he basically like made me cry just by like with kindness, you know, like with my, yeah, awful though, total nightmare, like funny now with all of you guys. Yeah.
All right, you tell us.
It's not on.
Oh, is that not on?
No.
It is on.
Is it on?
It's on.
Okay. I'll try to make this as concise as I can. I know that you didn't want your first novel adapted into a movie. I know somebody asked. And I was just wondering if that is about control, or maybe, I know earlier you were talking about how you were having more ideas for the book now that it's finished, so maybe it's just about making sure that you can take a piece of art and say, I'm done with that, and move on to something else.
Yeah, good question. I did, so he was saying, yeah, that I didn't want, somehow you know this, that I didn't want, it's like, it was between me and my agent. I said, no, I don't want. I think, you know, that was quite a while ago now, and I think I was still, I know, and I knew then that I don't want to adapt my own thing into a movie because I'm like tired of it by then. I want to do a new thing. But the idea of someone else doing it, I think I felt like not very established as a director, and I thought, well, that's just going to be so confusing to people, like what, like they're going to think I made it, and so that was the feeling, and I don't really feel that way so much anymore. I feel like, well, everyone who's interested understands by now the different mediums, and a lot of people don't care and aren't going to look at any of these things. So, and so I think I'm going to lift the, we'll see what happens. But yeah, at this point, I'm just kind of interested, and what, are they going to ruin it, the books? Hopefully not, yeah. This is not coming to a theater near you, and I probably, if it was, I wouldn't be talking so freely. That's all like an abstract new thought, yeah. Thanks.
Hi. One of the things I adore about your characters is how they jump out of the grooves of what we're supposed to be and do as human beings and just kind of explore different ways to be and live. And isn't it so wild that we're here and redecorate our motel rooms and just do all this weird shit? And I wonder, what of that do you explore or feel in your life versus what do you explore versus in your characters?
Yeah, I mean, on a good day, I have a moment at least of that, of like, oh, really here, really alive, you know, like living my life. Not that it's like a, you know, wacky moment, it's just an awareness of like, not just a ticker tape in my head. And in a book, you know, you get at that in different ways, that sense of really being here. But there's also, I guess I want to set that up in contrast to like part of really being here for the body experience is loss, you know? So some of that feeling isn't just a ecstatic feeling, although sometimes loss can have that quality, there's also like grief. There's like, oh, I'm really here, and it's like, this is hard. I guess this is really what life is, and that's certainly, that's a big part of aging, and it's also kind of like yours to have. Like it's not like that's, I mean, you've already all experienced loss. You've all been aging the whole time, and was it boring? No, like it's not suddenly gonna get boring, unless you're like, oh, this is like, now I am just a punchline, like that's the. I mean, that was kind of, sorry, now I'm just free ranging. This is hopefully the next person's question that I am now intuiting. But that was, maybe I didn't say this at the beginning, like, if we're talking about a time of hormonal change, well, you think of like puberty, and how if you turn on the radio at any given moment, you'll essentially hear like a teenage love song, like a love song that has this like teenage energy. And there is, in terms of that hormonal transition, there is so much storytelling, and it's so thick that you can kind of take your pick which version of this kind of coming of age story, finding your calling, falling in love, all this stuff, do you want? And you never would just say, like, it's just hormones. It's just the body. There's no narrative. So I think that's the weird thing, is to imagine, like, oh, this is a transition just as big as that, and yet it's like like the metal tire with no rubber on, no wheel on it. It's just like, now you just need to skid to death with no stories. There's no mythology, there's no songs. You just kind of gotta raw dog it to the end. And so that was part of the idea, was like, well, what is the meaning? And not just make it up, but like, what am I learning? And I did not know it when I started. And, I was 45, I'm 50 now. You still only know this little bit. But if I had to like marry the science, which I shouldn't do because I don't know anything about science, but I'd say, like, okay, so it's this time of like where your hormones are fluctuating all over the place, which is very unsettling, right? You literally sort of become unsettled. And what would be the meaning of that? Why might you, after having worked so hard to create a life and a structure, why might you need to become unsettled and have all these feelings? And some of them are sexual, and then not sexual, and then sexual, and it's like, well, maybe that's important. Maybe instead of being nothing, no reason, there is a reason, which is that what you're going to do next also takes some repositioning and thinking, like, well, what actually do I want to do? And you couldn't do that very well if you were just perfectly humming along, biologically in tune with everything you just built. And so the idea there is, the sort of basic idea is like, it's important what you do next. It's that important. So it's the beginning of just one book, right? There need to be a lot of books, a lot of options, because it is so specific. Okay. And your question is, thank you for that.
No raw dogging till
really
the
good
end.
question, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
First of all, I love the term coming of age. I feel like that's such a cool idea to extend throughout a lifetime. So just the way that you glommed onto that particular term, and why can't that be applied to any phase of life? But also, my original question was actually about fear, which you brought up earlier, and I feel like this is a really brave and interesting book to be so widely circulated, and I feel like it's such a common theme, as you said, for women to experience and go through this, what's often quiet and repressed phase of life, but instead to really shed light on it. It's a very brave thing to do, even if it feels like you have to do it, like it's a compulsion, and they're not compulsion, but anyway, question is, what part of this process for you was the scariest? Was it in the writing process? Was it in the conceiving process or the releasing process, and kind of why?
All right, another good question. In a way, the hardest thing, because like if something seems truly kind of daring and risky, I'm like, good. Like like something meets the challenge in me. So the scariest thing is, what if I'm making a big deal out of nothing? And there's a lot of reinforcement for that. And even in myself, like it could seem like, wait, no, I'm on to I'm holding the thread of something. This seems important. And then later that day, from another perspective, I'm home, I don't know, just something different. I'm like, why did that seem like such a big deal that I was like gonna start a revolution, like what, I literally can't quite get that back into focus. And so over years, it felt like kind of holding this thread. And I could also see in myself and around me that one reason why it would be hard to hold the thread is you're already really exhausted and guilty feeling about like 10 million other things. So to try and focus down all your, energy that you have on this kind of vague, insidious, what my mom's called not that big a deal for her, and it's not just to be clear, because I know most of you haven't read the book, I'm not really just talking about perimenopause. I'm also talking about sort of maybe life not fitting and all like structures not fitting, and that being at a certain point for women, and that being a kind of like secret, sort of like a whispered about, but not ever kind of congealing into, well, hold on, like maybe instead of just feeling terrible about this, there's, like a larger thing, and that would make sense given history and how this all came about, and we have historically course corrected, and we can do that again, and just because it's subtle and it has to do with women doesn't mean that shouldn't happen. Particularly like if we ever want to elect a woman president, or, there were ways I could connect the dots to like, maybe it's not just nothing, Okay, thank you.
You feel good to do 2 more questions? These 2 more questions? Yeah.
Hi, thanks so much for being here, despite you being super tired. Firstly, I really appreciate your talking about this big hormonal change as something worth balladizing, maybe. I experienced with postpartum that same sort of hormonal chaos, and I wish there were heavy metal mostly about postpartum. That'd be great. But I now have a 6-year-old, and in interacting with him, sometimes I think about the movie that you made, Me and You and Everyone We Know, and that very young child in the movie who I think so many felt so impacted by. I haven't read this book, so I don't know how the child plays in here, but I appreciated hearing that you did consult with someone of that generation in some of these. So I guess I'm wondering, for the youngest generation coming in, maybe, and I'm imagining that youngest character in that film, what stories do you imagine being important to them? Knowing that, again, when we're writing, as I'm writing now, we're trying to give something to them through our experience and through our lens. So yeah, what would you think is important to write to them right now?
Yeah, I don't know. Luckily, won't be able to think of it because that's on them. But I did have the thought, this kind of relates, when I was sort of weighing it, like, do I really want to tie myself to this topic? Like, because no one will say, why didn't you do that if you don't do it? Like, no one will know. And then I had this funny thought. This was, now like 5 years ago, I was sort of looking at like free the nipple and like free all the things that younger women were doing, free acne, just like, I'm not going to cover it up. Like, and it was working on me. I was like, yeah, why would acne be inherently ugly? Couldn't you just spin it and be like, no? Or like, oh, the one that really got me was there was like a youngish woman who had really long hanging breasts, like down to her waist, and that's what she was freeing. And they just seemed so hot to me. I was like, oh, I just want to go like this to them, and I was like, she did that. And if I don't do the book, I'm going to be sitting there in my 60s and 70s and just watch them do it. It's not like it's not going to get done, like this free the droopy breast woman she's not going to just be like, oh, I have, perimenopause, wah, wah, my turn is over, like, obviously not. So I'm so curious to see what they do, but I did kind of think like, okay, well, dibs on perimenopause. I was like literally the only person saying, at the time, I did have a sense, like I would open the New Yorker every week and be like, who stole the topic? Like, who scooped me? And after a while, I was like, oh, literally no one's, everyone's avoiding this. So yeah, I was safe.
All right, pressure's on. Last question.
Were we kind of, maybe the tablet is for people who couldn't easily get up and speak? Should we do like,
Should we do a few
just
more?
to break
All right,
it up?
go ahead.
Oh,
Yeah,
well, you were already doing ones from there, were you?
I was, and
okay.
I've sort of been my eye on it, but
okay.
we just
You're
don't want to keep you all
managing
night long.
Yeah,
We
I'd
kind
love
of do
to
want to
not
keep
be
you
the
all night
last
long.
word here.
Yeah.
After that litany
Sorry,
of
go
good
for it.
questions, of course. Well, I discovered your work during the pandemic when, a lot of my thoughts were insular, and I was really taken by your emphasis on connection and openness and stuff. And, I think a little bit of that has rubbed off on me. I feel, or at least try to be more open to other people and, greeting people on the street and such. But I guess, as we incur these life crises and these traumas are more abundant under our belt, how would you say even your characters remain open, to the chances and to other people? Because I feel like, that's missing in the world, and you really bring that into the forefront with your work, so.
Thank you, that's so nice. I should say I don't greet anyone on the street. And I'm like, I know it must seem like I'm, kind of like huggy, or I don't, like, I'm like pretty in my head, and I'm interested in people. Like I'm kind of looking always, but I'm like horrified usually if they try and engage. That sounds awful. Not really, but like I want to. So yeah, I'm just trying to make it clear that like it's a special thing to me when a connection happens, because it usually actually it's not just the other person, it's me too who has to, break out of a standard way of being. Yeah, to and that's fine with me, and I guess mostly, I mean, I've been in airports almost every single day, which you can kind of take your pick. Like, do you want to hate everyone? Or, or do you want to just be like, wow, every single face, I've never seen that person before. And, you know, like, it's almost like this, just see how much dialogue you can overhear on the plane. The couple, I had just the worst, like a window seat, and then the two people next to me that was like an old couple, so old that I was like, I can't ask them to keep getting up. You know, I'm trying to like constantly hydrate. I'm trying to treat it like a spa, you know, is my delusion. So I'd have to pee a lot, but I was like, I can't do that with them. I just have to. Anyways, the dialogue was he was making chit chat with another person about how hot it was in Texas, where we all just came from already, you know, and it was. And then she made a little noise. She was like, oh, and he goes, oh, right. We don't talk about how hot it is because it doesn't make it cooler. And she kind of nodded, and I could see, like, especially if you were pretty old and this whole like global warming thing was kind of like not your problem, you were like out of here, that might actually be sort of a good approach, you know? Like, anyways, yeah, God, I loved that. Just literally the opposite of everything, you know, that I was, in terms of the weather and climate change. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, just
okay.
Listen.
Thank
I guess
you.
Just listening. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
You know what? It's a really good transition to the biggest vote getter on the submitted questions, which is this: should women get married?
Was that like voted up? Because people.
That was the number one voted. Yes, it was voted up. It's right at the top of
Wow.
the list here.
Gosh, maybe that fact kind of answers the question.
I agree with you.
Like, I don't even have to say it. I'm completely innocent. No. I mean, it is worth thinking about the whole roots of the whole thing. You know, like we've reconsidered so much, you know. I don't know. I think also it's, you know, the point is not really like some condemnation of one thing. I mean, what marriage might mean to you might be such a specific thing, and you know. So I guess I just feel like, a lot of the sort of unspoken rules of marriage are even the rule of like, we don't talk about the marriage, we don't talk about sex anymore. Like, who's that protect? You know, like how did that become like a way that you were respectful? So some of these things aren't the obvious things, you know. You kind of have to like, keep thinking it through, because I also just don't, if this isn't a book about just blowing up your life, you know, because I feel like then whatever, you're just going to do it again. You know, you're going to be like, wait, I have a new good idea, and that's to get married to this new person. And so there is much more kind of anxiety and questioning the anxiety, like, why is there this fear? Why do I feel like I might be cast out, you know, or burned at the stake or whatever, than just actual like wanting to cause devastation and havoc. Like, this is not a useful guide for that. All right.
All right, well.
So that was it. Yeah.
Well, I think we're super over time, and your publicist over here is saying to me, we're super over time.
Right.
Because we have to let you sign books for everybody in the room. Yes. Okay. Everybody. However,
like, is that just a turn of phrase?
No. Let you sign books for everybody in the room. We are so grateful to you for being here and for writing this book.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
All right, everybody. Hello. So thank you all so much for sitting in your seats. We're going to take a little brief interlude before we get to the signing. Couple of notes about the signing. Miranda's not going to do any photos. If you have a kind friend who wants to take a candid of Miranda signing your book, that's okay, but we're not going to do any posed photos. So before we all get up at